Hi, this is Bill Ford. Today we're going to talk about the second step in the process, which is needs assessment, sometimes called the discovery. Doesn't matter what you call it; it's actually more important that it's very important part of the process. Because with this information, you'll be able to help them get on the right car, to help the desk structure a deal so that it's more pleasing to the customer. And then you can even use some of this information that you'll gather at this point to help you close the deal for the objections that are going to come later. To make it easier, I've broken it down into 5 categories of questions. Each category has 2 to 5 questions basically within it. And by doing it that way, it gives you the opportunity, you know what the categories of questions are and the questions within the category. And then it's not as important to sit down and do it all at once, which you could do. A lot of people do and do it successfully. But it may be something that you want to wait till later. Maybe you build a little more rapport to you get into some of the more personal type questions. So the 5 categories of questions are the vehicle they're interested in, the vehicle they're currently driving, regardless if they're going to trade it or not, some some financial qualifying questions, and then what their budget range is, and then what I like to call a competitive analysis, which is basically what else you've been looking at. So to start with the vehicle they're interested in, there's some basic questions to ask. And the first one would be, how familiar are you with the whatever vehicle it is, the Honda Accord, or if it's a used car, the Toyota Camry, whatever it happens to be. How familiar are you? And then the next question would be, have you had a chance to do some research to have an idea of what features or trim level you'd like to have? And then we would ask, who's this vehicle going to be for? And a word of caution on this, because if somebody, let's say that I'm there on behalf of my wife, she asked me to come look. Of course, our normal reaction would be to say, well, is your wife going to be joining us? And most likely the answer is going to be no, because a lot of people don't want to deal with us, so they'll send a spouse or a significant other into the dealership to kind of run interference and do the recon to see how, kind of narrow things down before they have to get involved with the process. So the word of caution is not to assume that this is something they're not going to buy a car, that you just need to kind of broom them off to get on to somebody that might be buying a car. What I found to be more likely is that we're going to approach this as though we're going to sell the vehicle to this person, the spouse, if in this case, and then we're going to send them home. We're going to make the deal. We're going to test drive the car, and then we're going to send them home with the deal and the vehicle itself, so that he'll probably close her for us more than likely in the comfort and convenience of her home, which that's really basically what they're looking for. So don't get discouraged on that. So the next question would be, is this going to be for business and personal use? It may seem like a little bit of a weird question, but I like to ask this question because it's a small number of people that are going to run it through their business, probably less than 10%, maybe closer to 5%. But it's good to know because it's a different process. It's a different application. The approval process generally takes a little more time to do. And it's also important for the desk to know when they're structuring the deal, what they're dealing with. So that's a good question, is this for business or personal use? And then, you can follow that up and summarize by what are some must-haves? There's always that list of things we want, but what are the things that you absolutely have to have? So the must-haves. And then the last question I like to ask is, by the way, you don't need to buy this today, do you? And that may sound like a weird question also, but the reality of it is that number one, it takes a lot of the stress out of the customer, anxiety and stress the customer might be feeling. It also sets it up so that if you don't have the specific vehicle that they're looking for, they may want to leave. But, so for example, somebody's coming in looking for a blue Accord, and you don't have one, we say, well, listen, I don't have the blue one, but I do have a silver one. Tell you what, let's drive the silver one. If you like the car, we can put all the numbers together. I can get you a blue one. In fact, my customers really like it this way because when it comes in, I'll get it cleaned up and have all the paperwork ready for you. So when you come in, you just have to sign and drive. And that's usually a pretty appealing proposition to ask. Now, the next question we're going to ask is about the vehicle they're currently driving. And notice I didn't say their trade. The reason is because if you ask somebody are you going to be trading a vehicle? Chances are pretty high they're going to say no or I don't know. And that's because all the videos and blogs and the stories out there, all the, the inside information, so to speak, says that don't tell them you have a trade until after you've negotiated the price of the car. Well, we know that all that does is extend the time that it takes to make the car deal. Everybody gets upset and then they complain about how long it takes with us. But if we ask it the same question a different way, and that would be, are you going to be adding or replacing a vehicle? So that's something their ears aren't maybe tuned in for, and it doesn't sound like such a sales question, like, are you going to be trading a vehicle? So if you ask the question by saying, are you going to be adding or replacing a vehicle, that you might have a chance to get a more truthful answer from them. And then next thing I would say is, are you currently whatever brand we're talking about? Is it, if you're currently, if you're a Honda dealer and you're looking for Hondas, are you currently a Honda owner? Or if it's a used car, are you currently a Toyota owner? Because that'll give us an idea that, if they're, let's say it's a Honda store and they're looking for a Honda, you have to sell them on that. They already own one. So they know it's a good car and they're more likely to be willing to purchase from us, and that we don't have to waste our time. We can kind of give them the benefits of what Honda is. So regardless whether that question is a yes or a no, the next question is the same, and that is, what are you driving now? Whether it be a new vehicle or a used vehicle, whatever, but what are you driving now? What year, what make, what model, how many miles, and then is it in good condition? And then I would follow that by saying, we love cars like that. And that doesn't matter if it's a fairly recent, nice used car or some old beater, because there's a market for everything. So if you said, we really like cars like that. In fact, our appraisers tend to be pretty generous for those, especially if it's in good condition. And that's your sort of disclaimer there, is that, we're going to pay more, but it's got to be in good condition. So if they bring you something that's a refugee from the junkyard, then you don't have to, it isn't like you're trying to mislead them. And then the other question would be, so what do you like most about your current vehicle? Because obviously if there's something they like about it, they're going to want to get more of that. And then you could say, well, what do you like least? I think a little more creative and less salesy way to say is, if you could change anything about your current vehicle, what would it be? And of course, we want to make sure whatever that is, ARC vehicles have that, or some version of it that we can offer them. So that takes care of the information about their trade. A good way to find out if they're going to actually trade, and some useful information about that, the things that they like about their current vehicle and the things that they don't like. Then the next thing we would do would be to ask them financial qualifying questions. And, the reason we do this now is that it's better to find out in this first 10, maybe 15 minutes of your interaction with them versus an hour and a half later. Nobody's happy about that. You've spent your time and they've spent their time, and it's just not going to go anywhere. So let's find out if they're financially capable of even purchasing a vehicle here up front. And we don't want to do it in a really direct and salesy way. So we're just going to ask them some questions. It sounds like up to this point, we just sort of have a conversation going. So we're going to keep this conversational, not like it's an inquiry. And we're going to say, how long have you owned your current vehicle? And they'll tell us whether it's 6 months or 5 years or whatever. The reason we ask that question, it kind of gives us an idea what their buying cycle might be, and it'll help us also determine maybe if they still owe some money on their car, what kind of money they owe. And then who did you finance it with? And that's one question that takes care of about 3 different questions. Because if you say, who'd you finance it with? If they paid cash, they're going to say, well, I paid cash. If they leased it, they're going to say, I leased it. And if they finance it, they're going to give you the name of bank. Now, it's important to pay attention the name of the bank, because let's just say if it's a well-known bank, maybe like Wells Fargo, that would indicate that at least at the time of their last purchase of this vehicle, they had pretty good credit. But if they say something like Santander or Westlake or one of these more high-risk lenders, then that'll give you an idea of at least what their financial situation was at the time of purchase. Now, a word of caution there. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have bad credit because they finance it through Santander. It means they probably had some challenges. But if they owned it for a couple of years and they made their payments on time, it's very likely that they may qualify for a better rate. Again, we don't need to have answers or respond to any of these questions. We're just gathering information here, okay? And then instead of asking them, how much do you owe? Again, that's a little more of a salesy question. It's very common. It puts people off. So if you said, how many payments do you think you have left? Again, it's more conversational. It doesn't sound like you're trying to gain some information you're going to use against them. So we've already got this nice, smooth conversation going. We're just asking questions. It don't sound like they're all that threatening. So if you just say, have you any idea how many payments you have left? And a customer might say, well, let's say I bought it 3 years ago. I financed for 5 years. So some are probably 22, 24 payments, something like that. And at this point, then we can hit them with the question of how much you send them each month. So whatever they tell you, just multiply that times the number of months you think they have left, and that'll give us some rough idea of what they owe in a car. And it's important because generally people don't like to tell you how much they owe in a car because, again, all the books and videos and magazine articles don't tell them how much you owe on your car because they're gonna lowball you on your trade. Not necessarily true, but that's what their thought is. So we need to deal with their reality. So with that information, now we've got a pretty good idea of what their credit situation may be or what it was, and to give us some indication there. So from there, we go direct, since we're talking about money, let's talk about what their budget would be. And rather than just say how much you want to spend or what's your budget, I like to expand it as much as possible and say, what's your budget range? A range is something a little broader than a specific, what kind of payments are you looking for? A question like that. So if you ask them, what's your budget range? And let's just say they respond, well, I want to be like right around $400. Well, we can up to them where we say, okay, 400 up to 450, but no more than $500. And psychologically, that 500, we know that's a throwaway. They're going to probably respond and say, no, there's no way I could do $500. Okay, so somewhere in that 450 range in there. And but maybe closer to 400. But even if you bumped them $20, $25, we know that's probably $1,000 on a 5-year loan. So it's a good way of kind of getting a general idea. Now, the key thing is that if we know, let's say that they say their budget range is $400, and they're looking at a car that's $35,000 or $40,000, and they're not going to put much, if any, money down, and that's a math problem. And so we know at this point that probably if they're let's just say that the car they're looking at, with what you've learned so far, they're well beyond that $400 mark. Now, we don't want to tell them that they can't afford this. We're not here to do that. We're here to try to help guide them and get on the right car in the most efficient, time-saving process as possible. So we might say, well, okay, so if your budget really is $400, this car, unless you're going to put a lot of money down or have a lot of equity in your trade, you're probably looking closer to $600. Are you okay with that? Of course, now they're going to give you a response to say, well, yes or no. And if they say yes, we're moving on. If they say no, okay, well, would you have, since this is going to be closer to 600, would you have some flexibility on the payments or the vehicle itself? And again, this is a better way of saying it. So, well, you're going to have to look at a used car. You can't afford this, because we really don't know at this point. They may be just trying to work us to get a better price. So the idea would be to we want to keep this as broad as possible without being specific. So we want to try to up to them, say whatever number they give us, say, okay, and we'll bump them in $50 increments. So $400, okay, so $450 up to $500, no more than $500. And let them dial us back. That makes them feel like they're in control, and that's a good thing. Now from there, and also I want to talk about if somebody's telling you at this juncture that they're going to pay cash, for example, now is not the time to try to talk them out of paying cash. Our priorities are always sell the car, secure the financing, and make some money. It has to be in that very specific order. So if we haven't sold them a car yet, it's not time to talk about how they're going to pay for it. If they think they're going to pay cash and they prefer to pay cash, and generally cash buyers are pretty staunch cash buyers, that's what they do, but that's okay, because at least we know we don't have a credit problem on our hands. What we'll do is we'll say to them, great, so let's find a car, and then I'll get you all the bottom line numbers so you know exactly where you are. And nobody's going to argue with that, and you haven't tried to change their mind about what they came in to do. And that's really going to separate you from the majority of the people they're going to talk to dealerships, because almost everybody's going to try to talk to them, oh, well, we've got great financing, you'd be smarter to put your money, to keep your money in your bank, et cetera. That's not our job at this point. That's our finance department's job. The other thing, too, is if somebody says to you, well, I've got my own financing, again, the common thing to do would be say, well, we've got great rates. If we could meet or beat your rate, would you finance with us? And that's not really what we're looking for. What we want to do is focus on selling the car, and let's not muddy the waters with them having to deal with anything different than that. Now, later on, once we get the car sold, are we going to take a shot at them for financing? Absolutely, we are. But we're going to do that at the appropriate time, and now's not it. So similarly to the cash buyer, we're going to say, great, let's find a car. Notice everything relates back to, let's find a car, and then we can plug in the rate that they qualified you at, and you know exactly what your payments are going to be. And then we can just move on. So those are some great suggestions on, those two things about paying cash and I've got my own financing. Let's not try to change that at this juncture. We're going to change that at the appropriate time, which is after they say yes. Say yes to the sale. Then the last category is called the needs analysis. And at this point, we're just going to try to find out what else they've been looking for. It's going to give some great insight to what their habits are and what they're looking for. So the first question would be, what else have you been considering? What else have you looked at? And of course, they may have 2 or 3 or 4 different vehicles that they've been looking at. And then our next question would be, well, what's been your favorite so far? And of course, if they looked at 2 or 3, they probably have 1 or 2 that's been their favorite. And of course, then our next question logically would be, what did you like about the whatever vehicle? And at that point, this is when we need to really start paying attention, because they're going to start telling us these hot buttons that they have and ways to sell them. So the response might be, well, it had this feature and that feature, or it didn't have this, which is something I don't need. And then the last question, and I like how this the money question, because this is when you really want to pay attention to, because at this point now they're going to tell you how to sell them a car. And so you say, what? So I'm just curious, if you liked it and you liked everything about it, why didn't you purchase it? What kept you from buying it? And now they're going to tell us. They're going to say, well, they wouldn't give me what I wanted for my trade, or they wouldn't discount the car, or the rates were too high, or the salesman was a jerk, or the salesman was pushy, or the sales manager was a jerk. And so, you get the idea. So we want to pay attention to that. And then now we've got this ball of information. We know about the car they're interested in purchasing. We know some information for the current vehicle, what they like, what they don't like. We know how long they've been driving it, doing some budgetary qualifying, what bank they qualified for. So we got an idea if they're financially capable. We talked about how to handle. I'm paying cash, and I've got my own financing. We're not going to we're crossing that bridge at this juncture. And then we're going to find out what the heck else they've been looking at. And we're going to take all that big ball of information, and we're going to go to the desk. Now, you have a needs analysis sheet. I would highly encourage you to do these things. There's a lot of things that will take you 1 or 2 minutes to do that can save you 10 times that amount of time, and in many cases, make or break your car deal. So take the time to make the notes of that information on your needs analysis sheet. And then you can go to the desk and say, okay, I got Mr. Jones here, and here's the information. And with that, they can structure the deal in a way that's more appealing to the customer. And if you've been doing this any length of time at all, you really know that how a deal is structured / presented to the customer has a huge determination on whether it's going to go through or not, make a sale. So that kind of summarizes step number 2. It's a very important step. Now, the key thing is, to be successful in our business, you got to ask the right questions, and you have to listen, not with the intent to respond, but to understand. And that's really, really important. You got to become very good listeners. You got 2 of these and 1 of these, as they say, and there's a reason for that. So you really have to pay attention to this information. While you're gaining this information, you don't need to solve any problems. You don't need to make any comments on it. You're just gathering information at this point. So from that, we're going to go to the next step.